is an introduction, and it's an introduction because the topic is a really, really large one. So I just want to give you an idea of what the German rural mail system, otherwise known as Landpost in German, is like, and an idea of some of the markings. So have any of you ever seen a marking like this and wondered what it was? This is a German rural mail or Landpost town marking. And as we know, rural mail is a very important part of any country's postal system. Now, in the United States, farms are often separated by large distances. This is a picture taken a couple years ago in Iowa. It's a street our GPS took us down, and we were taking Iowa mud out of our mud flaps for the next month and a half. But because of the large distances, in the United States, they chose rural free delivery. Germany's different. In Germany, farms radiate outward from a central village, and many of them were walled, although not so much as time went on, and thus they were easier to defend. Everybody could come to the center and mount a defense if it was necessary. So in Germany, they chose a different plan. You can see this map of Germany in 1866. It was a crazy potpourri mishmash of many states, each with its own postal system. So to even move mail between the different systems was difficult, let alone to rural destinations out in the middle of nowhere. In some places, you could go only 30 miles, yet travel through multiple countries. You can especially see that in the center of the map, the different greens and oranges. Of course, as we know, there were private services, such as the famous turn and taxes system. They'd deliver anywhere for a price. So we have this cover here that's an example of this. It's to a town called Gratenberg by Lehrte, which later became part of the rural system around Lehrte. Now in Baden, at the time it was a separate government, separate state, they had special stamps for rural service, and that's where we get the term Landpost from. Rural mail always incurred an additional delivery fee because the postman had to go out of his way to deliver it. And in some cases you could prepay it, or in other cases, they could be charged to the receiver through these postage due stamps. These were created especially for rural service. And I think these might be the only ones for which a special stamp was created. We move up to Bavaria in 1911. At this point, while there was a Germany, Bavaria was still semi-autonomous and semi-independent with its own postal system. So as Germany began to coalesce around Prussia, literacy in Germany was 85%. So that meant even in rural areas, people could read and write, and that meant a need and use for mails. Unfortunately, by the time Germany was formed in 1871, just a little over half of the population had access to a post office. In most cases, due to the small size of these towns, there really wasn't enough business for a full post office. So Bavaria and later Germany introduced postal agencies and auxiliary offices. These were known as Posthilfsstelle, or post helping places. German's very literal, to meet this need. And this is an example of the Posthilfsstelle Sucking near Starnberg in Bavaria. The other thing that happened around the turn of the century was the mechanization and growth. You see here on the 100th anniversary of the Kraftpost in which means powered post, in 1905. This is one of the vehicles that was used to start moving mail around Germany. The system was overwhelmed. Too many towns had the same name. As a lot of you know, there's a very famous Frankfurt, a major city in West Germany, Frankfurt am Main, but there's also a Frankfurt an der Oder in the far eastern part of Germany. So delivery to the right part of Germany was a challenge. I mean, I think there's like 50 or 60 different Neustadts, for example. Many areas were still underserved, and more offices meant greater safety, as the post offices also operated as a bank. And to this day, there still exists a Postbank, although it's not associated with the post office at this point due to privatization. But a lot of times, about this time, Bismarck had introduced a pension system, so people would go to their Postbank at the post office to pick up their pension check and then get robbed and mugged on the way home. So a larger system of post offices meant greater safety. So in 1928, they did a complete overhaul. It was the introduction of the Landpost, April 1st, 1928. This sign is a sign in Germany, an old relic sign of the old Kraftpost. It's where the postal van would stop. So it was a combination of postal vans and small offices that allowed them to serve the rural area. In Germany, Land equals country, and that in both sense of the word, just like it is in English. Country as in the United States or Germany, but also country as in out in the country. So Landpost equals country rural post. There were two kinds of offices founded in 1928. The first was the Post Agentur, or postal agency, which was later called a Poststelle 1. This was more services, and it was permitted to have a real cancel. Here's an example from 1944. The smaller ones were the Poststelle, later Poststelle 2. They had limited services. They used town markings as cancellation took place at the regional office, otherwise known as a light post office or a leading post office, where the mail was sorted. And oftentimes, the office in the little town was only open for an hour or so before and after the postal van came. They weren't open all the time. Often they were in cafes or bars or a general store, things like that, just like we'd see in rural US. And first, for Poststelle 2 offices, town markings, like the one you see here in the purple, were used with the name of the office, followed by the name of the regional office and the word Land. Items were given the town marking either at the small office or on the Kraftpost band. So a Kraftpost band might have a row of different town markings probably in alphabetical order or in route order, and then they would just come in and stamp them. Then all of the letters were taken to the regional office for cancellation. And if you see the cancel here on the 15 Pfennig stamp, the word Land is in the cancel. And these kind of cancels were only used for Landpost mail. There was also, for the smaller posts off in the city, there was also a mark that said Stadt. I don't have any examples here though. Here we go. That was a little cumbersome, so the Reichspost recommended that the form Poststelle über LPA, so in other words, the town via the main office, be used to address mail. And it made sense then to adopt these for the town markings. These had a wide variety of formats. We see a couple of different ones here. There's different fonts, there's different enclosures, there's actually different levels. There's some that are on one row, some that are on 2 rows, some that are on 3 rows. Sometimes there's a dividing mark, sometimes there isn't. Best estimate is that there were over 25,000 different markings for different towns between 1928 and 1945. Here's an example of some of the Landpost areas and routes. So these are the boundaries for the light post in the Hanover area and around 1967. So you can see, and the interesting thing is these areas somewhat followed the political boundaries, but in many cases did not. So if you look up to the right-hand corner, you'll see the town of Lehrte as a fairly large black dot, and that was the main post office of the area with other post offices within those boundaries subsidiary to it. Now here's an example of the different routes. This is the Landpost routes in Kreis or County Bergdorf, 1959. While Lehrte was the largest and still remains the largest town in the area, Bergdorf was actually the county seat. And you can see at the bottom of the chart that some of the different routes actually go outside of the county, outside of county lines. So in and around Lehrte, which is in the lower center part of the map, just a little bit below the center, there were actually 3 routes at this time. Well, excuse me, 4 routes at this time. There are 3 large routes and then a small route between Bergdorf and Lehrte that stopped at a couple small towns, one of which was Rodensen, where I lived. The interesting thing is how sometimes this worked. On the route, if you were on the wrong side of the route, a very short trip, in this case, a 4-kilometer trip from Klauen to Großlobke ended up becoming 40 kilometers because the letter was being sent from Großlobke to Klauen, but Großlobke came after Klauen on the route. So it had to go all the way into Lehrte to be canceled and all the way back out to Clown. Now, if you were lucky and the town you were sending to followed the town you were living in on the route, well, as in this case, the town of Heimar was after Rathmar on the route. So the postal agent was permitted to use the town marking as a cancel, and the item did not need to go to the LPA. And these are fairly rare. They're hard to find. I only have two. They were allowed to use the marking, and sometimes they used the pen cancel. The trouble with pen cancels, I've been asked why I don't have one in my exhibit. You'd have to know what the address was, the sending address and the receiving address, and you'd have to get lucky trying to find it in a stack of cards. And a lot of times things with pen cancels aren't really considered worth much, so they were thrown out. The concept of the Landpost was also used in occupied areas. Here we have an example. This is a package card from the general government, occupied Poland, to the infamous Flossenburg concentration camp. And in this case, both post offices were Postella 1 rural offices. You can see the Uber in both cancels. The center cancel on the stamp is from Radomsko. It's Wood, I can't even pronounce that. Wajaho Uber Radomsko. The cancel next to the stamp is the receiving cancel at Flossenburg, and it's Flossenburg über Floss. In 1941, two-digit postal codes were introduced, at first for packages, and then in 1943 for all mail. While I've not been able to confirm this yet, I've been told that one of the reasons for using two-digit postal codes is that Germany used a lot of labor from non-Germans because to run the postal services, because the men were all at war. And they had trouble reading the German handwriting. And even today, it's hard reading the German handwriting. So the postal codes allowed them to sort the mail, at least to get it going in the right direction. In June of 1944, they were required for all of the Landpost markings. That didn't always happen because, due to the war, transportation and manufacture of the stamps for this were problematic. People just tended to use things until they wore out. But some do exist. This is an example of a letter that was sent on February 1945, and it wasn't received until mid-August of 1945. So we have examples of post-war usages. Here is an example of some of the different usages you might see in both West and East Germany. The Landpost system was retained in both countries, and postal codes were also retained, although some were split into parts. So for example, you can see up at the top on the left, you have Obersagen über Lehrte with postal code 20, and then you have postal code 20A for Honigsen, and then a different type of marking, postal code 20A for Abensen über Hanover. Down in the lower left corner is Großschwächchen über Geldbach, and that's in East German. And then the final one is Rudensen über Lehrte. Even this, the post offices got overwhelmed by sorting. So Germany finally decided in 1960, both East and the West, to introduce new 4-digit postal codes. In the West, for a short period of time, they had the auxiliary markings showing the postal code, as here. You'll notice the word Uber is gone. But then the West German Bundespost authorities decided that all offices would then become full post offices and have the ability to use cancels, full cancels. That was not the case in East Germany, as you see with the cancellation and marking on the upper right-hand side from Zeitz. So you'll see two things here, interestingly. You'll see the old postal code for Zeitz, 21. Then you'll also see the new 4-digit postal code, 4981. And then separate to that is a normal Zeitz cancel, which means wherever that office for Zeitz was, it was then taken into the main post office in Zeitz to be canceled. In fact, these markings were retained in parts of the East Germany until unification in 1990. And then the lower example is example of the new cancellation with the 4-digit postal code. In the mid-1970s, Germany began a time of land reform where they consolidated a lot of the rural counties into larger counties. They consolidated the various villages around a town into a central town. And so, for example, the Kreisbergdorf that existed in 1973, when I went there, by 1975, no longer existed. It was part of what they called at that time Hanoverland, and then they broke them down further into communities, into cities where the small cities would have rural towns around them, 5, 6, 10 maybe. And by this time, most residents had at least one car. So a lot of these rural offices quickly became redundant. You really didn't have to walk down the street to your local office, because in a 5-minute drive, you could be at the main city offices and get more services and get things out more quickly. So that led to the postal van system ending in 1985. Finally, with the introduction of the 5-digit postal code in 1993, due in part to unification, large regional sorting centers were created, which fully integrated the old rural system into the national system. It's pretty similar to what's happened in the United States. Yes, you can still get a cancel at your local post office, but most of the sorting and most of the canceling is done with huge machines at centralized locations. So we'll see examples of all three of these here. On the left, we have the former ARPGA 3161 post office now became the Lehrte 8 branch post office, as seen by this pictorial cancel. In the middle, we have an example from Wuppertal of a special cancel commemorating, there was a small circus elephant in the 1950s named Tuffy, who actually jumped out. They have a monorail, which can be seen on the stamp here, and she actually jumped out of the monorail into the river and survived and lived a long life after that. And finally, on the right is an example of Briefzentrum. And this is actually also from the Hanover area. It's Briefzentrum 30, which is the Hanover area. And this is a fairly recent one from 2020, which also has a cancel saying, "Together against Corona, protect yourself and others." So thank you. If you would like more information and more detailed information, you may see the March and April 2020 issues of the German Postal Specialist. And of course, you're more than welcome to look at my exhibit, Landpost über Lehrte, which goes into a little bit more in depth into this topic, using Lehrte as an example of the system.
Okay, thank you. That was a really nice presentation. At this time, we ask that you unmute yourselves. And so if you've got any questions, you can go ahead and give them to Ken right now.
All right, I'm trying to figure out how to make this big again. Oh, I need to
There
stop
should be
sharing.
there should be up at the top a stop sharing button that we don't see, but you do.
I shrank my screen and I don't know what the heck I did. Oh, here we are, stop share.
There we go.
Ah, much better.
So questions?
So I just want to mention, that was just really well done, Ken. It really taught me a lot about the land delivery system. Just a really good presentation. I don't have any questions, but it's not really my area, but I appreciate the presentation a lot.
There's still a lot to learn because I know some of these things, but I'm still a little sketchy on the details. The scary part is I was once told that, you're the North American expert in this. And I'm like, who, me? But when you get into something, that is exactly what happens. Someday I'm hoping to have the opportunity to go and prowl around in the archives a little bit and see if I can find a little bit more detail.
Do you know if they carried this into the occupations of the Baltics in World War II? I mean, you showed general government in Poland.
I'm not certain because I've not seen any examples, but it wouldn't surprise me. But then again, the Baltics were pretty small to begin with. To some extent, they were the size of maybe 3 or 4 German counties likely, so I don't know. Certainly, general government was meant to be an integral part of Germany at some point, so they would definitely want to do it there. I don't think they felt quite the same way about the Baltics. They were certainly just as much occupied under the Germans as they were under the Soviets, but.
Well, they welcomed the Germans in a lot of times.
Yeah,
After
the person I should
Soviet
ask about that if I see him again is Preet Raban, because he is from the Baltics. He used to be a board member of the Germany Philatelic Society. You might actually have heard of that.
I can hear a
So,
bird chirping in the
out of
background.
curiosity,
Here.
when the folks that lived out in the country, they would have to purchase some postage due stamps. So when the carrier came by and it was extra for them, they could just put the stamps on to collect the mail.
They might have been done it that way, or they might have been available with the carrier. I am not certain.
Okay, thank you.
I think those were pretty widely counterfeited stamps too, those postage dues.
At least used. I mean, you know, let's be real. It was rural, and there wasn't as much. They were needed, but there wasn't an extensive call for it. You know, I showed one of the cancels from Roddenson where I lived. I have only ever seen one of the 4-digit cancels, and that's because I sent a letter to my folks and I took the stamps off, but I have the stamp at least. Hey, I was 17. I didn't know any better. And then I've only seen 2 of the town cancels. And I think a friend of mine has one more. So I've been tempted to go, and I wish I had been able to go 15 years ago when all of my aunts and uncles were still alive, and says, "You remember those postcards I sent you? Do you still have one?"
By the way, the GPS itself is an incredible organization. The materials they publish are just outstanding.
I will be happy to pass that back along to our editor, Peter Weissensal. He does a pretty good job.
It's just
not a
amazing.
perfect journal, but we try to do the best we can with what we have.
Yeah.
Also, their expertising services are incredible.
That we no
The
longer offer.
BPP.
Yeah, that we no longer offer. You can get expertising from Germany, from the German Federation, though, the Bund der Deutschen Philatelisten. But we're associated with that as friends. But
I thought it was the same organization. I didn't realize.
No. The BPP is Bund something Prüfer, or Federation of German Proofers, basically is what it is. That's run by the Bund der Deutschen Philatelisten, the Federation of German Philatelists. We used to have an expertising service, but that became problematic for a number of reasons. One of which was a lot of the experts we had unfortunately passed on. And there were legal issues too, I think, but that was before my time as a board member. But I would encourage you to check out our website, Germany Philatelic Society. Just Google it, it's easier than trying to type. I think it's Germany Philatelic Society USA.org, if I remember right, but I would encourage you to check it out. There's articles that you can get on the mailing list, and you get, we have a monthly stamp chat now, thanks to our new webmaster. So, and we will be meeting in Chicago at Chicago PIPEX. So you're welcome to come by and say hi.
Great.
I think everyone's tired.
I think so too. So we'll just pretend that our time limit has run out.
I don't mind. It's 8:30 here.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank you all for participating. And a special thanks to
Real quick.
There are many other PIPEX seminars that we hope you'll take in. What do we got? Half a dozen or a dozen of them tomorrow. So hopefully we'll see you again.
I may check out the beer stamp one. I'm a good German. I like my beer.
Real quick, over on the virtual stamp club, there's a guy who puts up a German stamp blog, and he comes up about once a week. So over on the virtual stamp club in the Facebook group, you might see his stuff from Germany there.
Do you know the person's name? I'm curious as to somebody I know.
Alzheimer's disease. He's a young guy. Looks like he's in his early 20s in the videos he does. So before my time, you know.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. That was an area I wasn't aware of. Thanks for mentioning it.
Okay, well, we'll shut this down and see y'all tomorrow.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys. And thanks to the organizers of PIPEX. It was really a great time and an opportunity to really do a lot of cool things here. And I hope to see the PIPEX people all in person next year because the GPS is coming to PIPEX.
Yeah. Looking forward to that.
So am I. I have never been to the Pacific Northwest, and I was so disappointed last year. So
I'd love to show you some of our beautiful things here, the Oregon coast and the mountains, and there's just a lot to see.
we have a day planned at the zoo because we have friends at the Oregon Zoo from our Elephant Managers Association. So we're really looking forward to it. Okay, thanks much, folks.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thanks a lot. Bye.